Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sustainability in the Sea, produced and hosted by FutureSwell. I'm Carissa Cabrera. You guys know me. This episode is coming out at a really interesting time. We're about, 5 or 6 days into COP28, and there's been a lot of outcomes with it. And our last Sustainability in the Sea episode sat down with Hailey Campbell to talk about COP, what it is, how to get there, how to get involved if you want to learn more about it, or if you see yourself going in future years, and talking about her journey. She's a huge international climate negotiator, and she's young. And so I would really listen to that. We ended up recording a second episode, which is what today's episode is, about the work she does outside of international climate negotiations and COP. In her day job, she actually works in climate change mitigation and adaptation for locally on Oahu. So she came over and we were able to record then. That's what this whole episode is going to be about. But before we get into it, I want to tell you guys kind of what's going on with COP, because it hadn't started by the time the last episode was produced. So day one of COP, actually the day before COP started, the president of COP, it's being hosted in Dubai, actually leaked documents came out that he was using COP to help facilitate oil negotiations with other countries that are going to be there physically because of COP, which is deeply disappointing, but also not that surprising, because there was uproar and criticism about him being chosen as the president of COP from the start, because he runs an oil company, and he's really might be passionate about renewable energy, but at the end of the day, he's part of the fossil fuel industry. So if you listen to the last episode, I won't give too much away, but one of the priorities for COP this year was a phase out of fossil fuels, which is ambitious, but also we can do anything, right? Not a phase down, a phase out of fossil fuels. To this day, no climate negotiations or agreements or documentation actually used the word fossil fuels. And one of the reasons why you might hear people say, oh, we're going net zero instead of going zero emissions, is because net zero means that you can use carbon offsets or carbon credits to be net zero on your emissions. But at the end of the day, we actually have to build new systems that don't even have a fossil fuel industry. And I think that it's really important. That nuance is really important. I wanted you guys to be prepared for it. As you see all this media coming out around COP, we're covering a lot of ocean climate related media on FutureSwell. Bodhi Patil is on the ground. He is part of the FutureSwell team, and he's part of the Indigenous Wisdom Keepers delegation, and many other organizations and institutions that he's affiliated with. But he's covering ocean climate updates, which are really important. So if you want to stay up to date on those, make sure you're following us on Instagram. And there's also, other updates being provided by activists, which is an important piece of this. To be honest, last year, the Loss and Damage Fund was a huge outcome of COP. And on day one of COP here, so this happened a few days ago, they announced the official Loss and Damage Fund, which is about resourcing countries that are less prepared and have less financial resources to deal with climate disasters and the climate emergency, by directly funding that relief. And so my understanding is that it's not as much money as it should be. They need trillions of dollars, and commitments are being made in the millions of dollars. And so still progress, but not perfect. And anyway, I just want to let you guys know before we get into this episode that there's a lot of stuff going on with COP. It's a really exciting time, kind of like New York Climate Week, right? But so much of the solutions that are being negotiated and decided on at COP through commitments are going to be implemented by local communities, by grassroots coalition, by those of us who work in those organizations and institutions. And so don't lose sight of that as you watch this high level, fancy climate global conference. It's just, at the end of the day, they're going to make really big decisions, and it will be implemented by people. And we're just people who are going to hopefully be part of that implementation. There's a lot of really exciting stuff. We had probably the biggest partnership of FutureSwell's life as part of COP, which you're just going to have to stay tuned on our Instagram to see what that is. I am almost in disbelief at this point. Anyway, let's get into mitigation adaptation. If you don't know what that means, it's about how regions are going to position themselves to not experience so much damage from climate change. We have a lot of that here locally on Oahu, which is what we focus on as an island with rising seas and erosion and flooding. But we also talk about her work with Care About Climate as a nonprofit that helps resource and train young people like you guys probably listening to this about COP and how to get to COP. So we talk about both. Hailey's a really a wealth of knowledge, to be honest, and I'm really excited to share part 2 of it with you today. And then, you know, we had the November Ripple go out. I'm going to put it in the bio if you want to check it out. There's a lot of really cool jobs there. We also launched a second merch collection that is only accessible in the newsletter. And now with you guys, it's also going to be only accessible in this episode. So we wanted to just reward like the most engaged FutureSwell listeners and readers by giving you early access. So I hope you check it out. The designs are really amazing, and we're going to have an episode about what went into those designs and how this collection is sustainable in another episode that I hope you'll listen to. So, okay, all right, let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Sustainability and the Sea. All right, we're back with part 2 with Hailey about COP.
Yes, part 2.
We had to do it. So basically, we got like a really high-level overview of how COP works, what it's like to be there, what's happening, what kind of insidious powers that be might be going on there. And now it's like, why does all this stuff matter and how does it translate to local work? I know you also work locally. You also are lead an NGO or co-lead an NGO, and I work locally. And so I'm really excited to talk about this part of how it trickles down to really become effective. So basically, I guess, what do you do at Care About Climate, and how does it kind of fit in with COP or fit in with local work?
Yeah, definitely. So mentioned I lead Care About Climate, and we are a youth-led nonprofit that empowers young people to have the skills and confidence to make an impact in these climate policy making spaces through the international level. And the understanding is if you can understand this international space, all of those skills also translate back to your local space when you come home. So like, I used all my skills from Care About Climate and negotiating to organize the National Youth Climate Conference, Elkhorn. And so it's kind of a bridge between both. And so specifically how we do that at Care About Climate is through kind of 3 main ways. First, we have our International Climate Policy and Advocacy Training, for short, our COP course, and it's with 10 years of collective experience of young people going to these spaces, learning how to unlock the power of young people in an international climate policy space and use those skills to make an impact. So it has the history of COP if you want to learn more about it, but also...
Is it free?
We have a free option. We do have an option of like free versus a small fee, mostly because we are a nonprofit and we have to pay for our website somehow. But it's like I believe that education should be free. Yeah, it's basically a crash course on what is COP, how do you be an advocate at COP, how do you network, but also how do you take care of your mental health while you're there, which is super, super critical and important. And it's available right now in English, Spanish, Arabic, and French, which is what's unique about it compared to some of those other ones that you'll see online from the UN or other big entities like Oxford is we have live Zoom sessions people can attend to build community around it. So we also have these discussion like platform channels where people can just talk about their learning, ask questions, kind of riff off each other and learn something from somebody else about their community. And then all of that coalesces to our final module, which is about that specific COP that year. How do you get there? How do you get a visa for it if you need one? How do you find your hotel? How do you navigate the city? We have all these resources we collate for it, which is super, super helpful. And like the resources, like we actually use at Care About Climate for our own delegation too. So it's super amazing to have that training.
So a huge resource hub, training, education.
Exactly.
And it's
what are the negotiation tracks? We pull in people who are really knowledgeable about a specific track to share their knowledge about it.
Yeah.
What can you advocate for?
And everyone can follow along on what Care About Climate's doing because you're having opportunities for people to engage with it.
Exactly. It's just an opportunity for peer mentorship, co-learning together, solidarity building in many ways. It's super fun. I always love engaging with everyone on there, answering questions. It's really a great space. So we do that. Our second program is, in the previous episode, I talked about these things called nationally determined contributions, right? Countries' commitments to tackling the climate crisis mandated under the Paris Agreement. Mandating mean like it is a voluntary commitment, but you kind of have to submit one of these things.
Yeah.
And so what we find is that a majority of them lack inclusion of women and girls and of young people. And those that tend to lack them are also less ambitious. And so we train young people from their country itself to learn about their NDC and then provide recommendations that their country should do to better engage women and girls and young people and meet their needs, not just as victims of climate change, but also solutioneers and champions for change. And so it's really amazing because we're then empowering people to be able to talk to their policymakers, whether it's at COP or at home, and to learn from policies like I mentioned, saying, hey, you agreed to include young people, but you're not doing it. Here's how I think that it would work best to include us here in our community in the context of my country. And it's a really amazing advocacy tool that young people can kind of take away. And we pay people to write their analysis. It's an awesome paid opportunity, which is great. So you get paid to learn. Who doesn't love that? That's another thing. And then our last kind of combined ways is we do a lot of social media outreach, right? It's about storytelling and awareness raising. But then we actually were founded originally to get young people that opportunity, that ticket to entry to go to COP. And so we raise money to get young people the opportunity to pay for their way there. We offer badges to young people from around the world. And we create this community where you don't have to overcome so many barriers of researching an organization. You're already a part of one that sends people. And that's super empowering because you create this welcoming environment where everyone feels like they can contribute and that they can have their voice heard on the international stage. And that's why we were founded. You know, the youth constituency only gets 20 badges. Yeah. And so to have that young and that youth presence, we need, because it's literally our future being negotiated, we need youth organizations that are accredited to be able to attend these events. And
get more badges.
And get more badges and get people in the room and all of those things that we need for a successful outcome. So it's super cool.
You're like the starting point.
Yeah, exactly.
For young people getting involved in international climate solutions.
Yeah, exactly. I got excited about Care About Climate because when I first went to COP, I was so confused. I didn't really get good training from university. Yeah. I felt like I didn't really belong there in a way. I was like, I don't know enough to be here. And then I realized that even if you get a badge and funding, which is the first two big hurdles, if you don't know how to talk like a policymaker, if you don't know how to make the most of that really unique and selective and special opportunity that's really coveted by so many people, then it doesn't matter if you've brought your own chair to the table, because you can't speak and advocate in a way that policymakers will actually hear you.
Yeah, you need to be effective too. Getting there is only
half the battle. It's kind of like the age old, like, you got to manage up, but truly you do. You have to prove to these adults that you know what you're talking about and that you're just as important as everybody else there. And it's kind of my favorite thing about the youth space. Oftentimes adults will be like, or older adults rather, will be like, the young people don't see hierarchy. Like, you'll just go up to anyone and tell them how you feel. And I'm like, yeah, because hierarchy of power to make decisions about my future
it's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant because it's my future. Yeah. You know, you respect.
That's my hierarchy.
Exactly. You respect and listen to the wisdom of elders, right? But the actual decision making should be with the people who are affected most by it. And so I'm really thankful to be a part of Care About Climate and to be able to co-lead it with my friend Obiyemi from Nigeria. We're international org, so international orgs should have international leadership.
Yeah, and I love that everything is really accessible through remote opportunities and really decentralized, so that people can engage to whatever, degree that they want to, or become a volunteer and be part of the core team and programming and things like that. And
we have 97 volunteers from around the world, 37 countries actually, and for the first time this year we sent people to even the regional climate weeks to share about their work. And so there's, I just had people from Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil for the first time ever getting to go to their regional climate week in Panama. So now they're getting to connect with more solutionaires and people and from their communities, talking about solutions that are, pretty similar oftentimes. And so it's just really great to be able to it's access, opportunities, and knowledge. I always say it's three things: empowering, engaging, and educating people. That's what we do.
And then you take all of that knowledge and then you take it back to your neighborhood and see what you can build. And we're so lucky that we're able to work on solutions here locally in Hawaii.
Yeah.
But I feel like some of the learnings that people could get from Care About Climate about mitigation adaptation, they can take home like you do, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think what's unique about the international space is countries are agreeing to these big commitments, as I mentioned, and you're learning how to talk to policymakers, and you're learning how to raise your voice. But you can do that at home too. For example, here Locally, we have our own climate action plan, which is kind of like our NDC, if you will. And our commitment is 100% of net zero energy goals by 2045, which is way more ambitious than our own federal government, right? It's awesome. And we actually just had our last shipment of coal in last September, or I guess September a year ago, September. And it's like, we're doing it, you know? We're this island that contributes less than 1% of all of our emissions, but we're setting the example of...
We're teaching the rest of the
world.
The world where it's done. And
a sustainable and just future. And, like, I love this analogy. People like, we're island Earth. Like, you know, all of the islands in the Pacific are all, in the Caribbean, wherever all the islands around the world are setting these examples of we can do this. We've been doing it for centuries. If you look back into our Polynesian indigenous communities, Hawaiian people who were here first, and we're now showing to the world that this is possible.
And that all the solutions exist, and they've been passed down by ancestors.
Exactly, and we're learning from them. We're bringing them back up, and that is, I think, the power. We're bringing all that up, not just here, but all the way to the international space to say, how can we bridge that ancestral wisdom with modern day, you know, life? And because it looks very, very different, but they can still coexist together
and inform one another,
inform how we're all like living together.
And that's why I like working on like conservation solutions here in Hawaii, is because they are like, as a region, we are ready to be bold and be urgent and set examples and do things that haven't been done before, or do things that have been done far in the past. And I think that, like, I do that in the ocean conservation space here, but you do it in the adaptation and mitigation space. So like, what would you call like quote innovative, or some things that, you know, you're really excited that's going on here that you think other people can look to and, you know, take with them to their places?
Yeah, definitely. I think something really exciting. So locally, I do work on climate adaptation, and here our main hazards are sea level rise and coastal erosion, increasing temperatures and extreme heat, cloud burst, which is basically like lots of intense rain at once that causes flash flooding, drought, which has that cascading impact of wildfire. We all know it's really deep and fresh on our minds right now, especially today with the fire happening in Mililani-Mauka, and also an increased potential for hurricanes. And so we're looking at all those things that have the potential to impact Oahu. And what's unique about adaptation is it's super localized. What we're doing in, you know, the North Shore is super different than what we're going to be doing in Waimanalo or in Waikiki. It's that community local focus. And so when people ask me this question, like, what can I do? What's innovative? One, I think that innovation is such an interesting term because the wisdom of our ancestors is also innovation, right?
Yes.
It's like going back to it is they already did the innovating, you know? It's not just technological innovations, it's everything. And I just
gotta modernize it a little bit.
Exactly. It's just connect a little bridge together, and they want that too, right? And so I think, to me, the most important thing, of course, there's infrastructure changes, there's things that we need to be doing, but ultimately it's that community empowerment, that information sharing, that wisdom sharing, that I always say capacity sharing, what I can do in my field. You know, I also work for local government, what you can do in your conservation and your media and storytelling field. Like, we all need to be working together. And so,
not in silos.
Exactly. One of our new strategies for our newly released climate adaptation strategy last Wednesday, really exciting, November 1st was the launch date.
That's awesome.
Is super cool, is really focused on uplifting community leadership on climate adaptation, is using government as a way to help our community do what they already do well, even if it's not called climate adaptation, and we know that it is. Let's work together, and let's make sure that when we're working with community, we're also sharing information beyond that, you know, one-time event, because community leadership, they are the key messengers to so many people. We just talked about this, right? People aren't really always watching the news nowadays. They're either getting it from social media, they're getting it from someone that they talk to, especially here. And so how are we, you know, inspiring those types of conversations and those type of informed, rather, conversations about our future?
Yeah, and calling it what it is, right? Like, you might be going and working in a fish pond over the weekend, or you go and are killing invasive species, and is that also adaptation and mitigation, right?
Right. It is. When it comes down to it, it's, you know, we have a lot of invasive species, for example, to take your point.
As an island,
And here they often are a lot more water intensive than our endemic or native species that we have here. And so by trying to restore some of our upper watersheds, not only are we reducing the potential impacts of flooding, we are also, cleaning our water, right? And also making sure there's more available for it for potential situations of drought, since here our water is all coming from, groundwater, those aquifers from the Ahupua system. It's all connected, how it's always been, and over time, with colonization and other, factors, it's like we've kind of lost that. And, there's our streams are now concrete little diversions when they could just be a stream again.
Yeah. Right?
And it's like so easy.
I was learning about this approach called green breaks to stop fires, and I was talking about it in the context of west sides of islands that are more vulnerable to drought and fires. And it was like, oh, well, that also stops runoff, and that also helps prevent rubbish from getting down into our reefs. And it also, it's like it many of these holistic and nature-based approaches ultimately end up solving many challenges with one solution, which is so much more cost-effective.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, adaptation, it's not just about saving lives and saving nature. It's also about saving money. Sustainability has those three kind of pillars and spheres, and it's amazing how oftentimes the most cost-effective is just putting something back to the way that it used to be before we overdeveloped everything. Here we've lost 65% of all of our watersheds to human development. Yeah. We're on track to lose 40% of our beaches due to oceans or sea level rise and coastal erosion by 2050. I was on North Shore a couple weeks ago, and I'm terrified for the big wave season, because there's beach like this, and there's houses right here at this intersection, and I'm like, one big high wave event, and could these houses
pair it
fall
with king
again?
Tides, what's going to happen?
Exactly. And king tides, I think, are so important here because they're that tiny glimpse into the future of what could be normal.
Yes, like El Niños.
Yeah, exactly. And it's this is a reality that's going to get worse, and it's great to be able to show people, saying this is a king tide today, in the future, could be our normal. This is going to be our everyday. And that's why I think adaptation is critical, especially on an island space, because, at that, bridging it back out to the international space, it is an international responsibility to tackle our emissions. That is our use of fossil fuels. It's a global responsibility. Everyone needs to be doing it.
But we're locked in at a certain amount of warming and changes.
Exactly. Yeah. We're already locked into certain changes that
we have to adapt
to. But we're 99% sure are going to happen, and that's kind of that principle of, it's always a good example I like to say of, imagine you're planning a wedding. It's your big day, it's your big event, it's going to be outside, and if you want to get a rain cover, or a tent, you have to make that decision to pay for it in advance, because on the day of, you can't be sure there's going to be one available that will fit your wedding. So you have to decide, is it worth it to me to invest in this tent or canopy we may not use?
Yeah.
Or should I take the risk? And that's kind of what climate adaptation asks us to do. Oftentimes, many people will take that risk and say, well, if we don't use it, it'll just be on the side. Or if it does rain, we'll be so thankful that we had it. And it's that's kind of an example of...
And then the risk falls on the folks with less access, less resources, and less advantages.
Right. If you're trying to do a super... You don't have a lot of money to spend on your wedding, but you want to make it a meaningful day for you...
You might cut costs there. Yeah.
You might cut costs there, or you might not even, if it were to rain last minute, you might not have another choice, and you'll be really upset.
Yeah.
So it's often these decisions are really dependent on your access and your well-being, or your financial well-being, but they shouldn't have to be. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying on capacity sharing, community support. For example, one of my favorite actions I made these really cool games for work on climate adaptation for heat and sea level rise, downloadable online at climatereadywahoo.org.
I'll link it.
Yeah, I love these games, maybe because I put in a lot of energy to them, but they're really solutions focused. And one of my favorite solutions is focused on, it's really hot out, you can't afford an air conditioner, but that 3 houses down the street, they have an air conditioner. Maybe you just call them up and say, hey, it's really hot today, can I please come and sit in your air conditioner for an hour or two, and in exchange I will bring you some dinner. Super easy. And that's capacity, that's the sharing. It's we maybe don't all have everything, and we might not all have a shelter, a resilience hub to go to. It'd be great if we did, But it's like if you know your neighbors and you know your community, and maybe they got a grant from the government to get that air conditioner because they qualified and they wanted to go for it. Awesome. We can all benefit from all those types of things. So we all are a piece of that puzzle.
Yeah. No, I wanted to ask because you obviously, your upbringing was in Texas and you went to college in Arizona. And so, in a tropical ecosystem, we're facing, especially an island ecosystem, we're facing things like flood and sea level rise and these types of stressors from climate. But in another ecosystem, it could be drought, fire, heat stress. So you mentioned heat stress. What other adaptations at a community level or even a city and county level might a heat stressed community face, and what solutions could be implemented?
Definitely. So the first and foremost is awareness. There's a big lack of awareness among people generally on what are the signs of heat illness, and what's actually super interesting.
Know.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not something we get taught.
Yeah.
And I've actually had heat exhaustion, which is like right before heat stroke, which you can actually die from multiple times from living in Arizona. And had I known the signs of that before, I probably would have taken action earlier, or been like, my head's starting to hurt, I should probably go drink water instead of pushing it and helping out. But no one told me. I was like, my head just hurts today.
It was like normalized to pass out sometimes.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be, right? You should have people kind of looking out for you. So it's also, I think, heat early warning systems is super critical. They're actually naming heat waves in Spain, which is super cool.
Wow.
I think we should do that here. I think everybody should name them like we name hurricanes. Exactly, because heat is actually, in the United States and potentially globally, it is the number one killer from a weather-related disaster or event. It's heat. It's the number one killer.
And when water becomes more scarce when we're facing drought, it's a compounding stressor.
Exactly. And so I think early warning for heat stress, and also for farmers too, so they can prepare, and things like getting rain barrels and rainwater catchments in general, so that if water is scarce, you can still.
Yeah, ours was a rebate. I mean, granted, we're in a tropical area, so
water
but
a lot of places offer rebates for it. It's great. It's super easy to get one. It's like a container that holds water. Awesome. Yeah. And then I think lastly, in addition to things like, calling your neighbors and kind of figuring out those resources, it's also about like, what are those community spaces from a government perspective? Like, where can people go? Is it about libraries being open longer and being kind of these cooling centers like they do in Phoenix or Seattle or Portland? Do we even need that here? We're looking into it, but we're not sure yet, right? Because we don't face 100-degree temperatures, and we probably won't face that high, hopefully. Right. But what's interesting about heat is, I just learned this recently. Here, heat is connected a lot to our marine heat waves that happened in 2019 here. We had a marine heat wave that sat over us for like a month. So heat's long. It's not like a hurricane or a flood that's like a day or two.
It's chronic.
It's chronic, and it's long, and you don't really know how long it's going to last. But in addition to like cooling centers and those heat waves that can just sit there, it's super critical to just have those opportunities to call a friend and check in. Hey, how are you doing? It's really hot today. Do you need water? We also need to think about our houseless populations. Yes. Are they getting water? Are they getting shelter? I know in Arizona, I used to literally go to the grocery store from 3 to 5 p.m. because I did not want to sit at home in the heat. Yeah. So air conditioner didn't work. I was like, this is terrible.
Wow.
But I was like, I guess we'll just go to the grocery store. It's like, you figure it out.
Yeah. But what are your spaces? And what do you have those on hand?
Exactly. And there's not like a perfect solution. Oh, what I was going to say is on heat, what's really interesting is if heat your body at 87 degrees of a heat index, which is a combination of how hot it is outside with humidity, together forms this thing called a heat index. And at 87 degrees is when people can actually start experiencing the signs of a heat illness or be impacted by it, whether it's a heat rash or a headache or fainting or vomiting or sweating a lot at 87 degrees of a heat index. And that we do experience here.
Yeah.
Pretty, not every day, but
in the summer.
In the summer, that does happen. And so we may not be experiencing Arizona heat, but we are experiencing hot temperatures. And I'm looking forward to this. A bunch of people in the health sector here are actually working on a report to understand how many of their visits to the hospital in their certain time frame were related to heat stress. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that.
And none of us have air conditioning here either, so it's another compounding factor that makes you more vulnerable.
Exactly, lack of air conditioning. I mean, I don't have an air conditioner, and it's there'll be days where I'm literally dripping sweat in my room and I'm struggling to focus on work because I'm just so
Yeah, we have
hot.
invested in ceiling fans, which it's like is an access thing too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Floor fans, whatever. Yeah. Super interesting stuff, but
it depends what ecosystem faces your region, or what ecosystem stressors are unique to your region, and then what you might, if you're going to stay in that region for a long time, what you might choose to learn more about when it comes to like ways to be more resilient to it.
And what we're talking about is this concept of adaptive capacity. What is your vulnerability to an impact, and what is your ability to adapt? For example, if a hurricane were to hit here, and it wouldn't matter how much money you had, the hurricane's not going to say, oh, well, this building's really expensive, so we're not going to hit that building. We're going to hit all of these like super low income homeowners.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. So when a disaster strikes, it's not really at that instant deciding who's going to get hit. What the adaptive capacity says, well, these people who have more income, they probably have good insurance, or they could probably move, or maybe they could even have bought a flight out of here at a last minute rate to be safer. Their adaptive capacity is higher. But these other people who are more low income, they can't buy a flight out. They might, 80% of the homes here do not have hurricane ready roofs.
Oh, absolutely.
And
not
it's like,
this place,
yeah, exactly. And it's like, hello? Like, what? We're not ready, right? And so adaptation is saying, instead of being reactive and waiting to see how bad the damage is to do something about it or to rebuild, it's how can we be proactive and saying we know that these things are going to happen, much like the wedding, right? We know it could rain. We know these things could happen. How can we be prepared? And at the very least, if it doesn't happen, at least we know that if it were to be, we would be more likely to be okay. And that's, bringing it back up to the international level, that's what all of these negotiations and policies are about. Even if climate change ends up not being as bad as we all think it's going to be, or science is telling us it's going to be, although I believe it is, we would have just made the world a better place, and people would have been more ready, more community-centric, and probably better off.
Yeah. So how can folks listening to this who might want to get involved in their local adaptation and mitigation strategies start? Do you think that would be like a nonprofit, or do you think it would be city and county, or do you think that they need to learn more and see what's available in their resource hub and things like that?
I think that it really depends kind of at your scale. Most cities in the United States, and I don't know about the world, but many have climate mitigation, right, reducing emissions, and adaptation plans or resilience plans. And I think kind of starting there and seeing what your city has to offer in terms of what they're trying to do is a really good starting place of just trying to learn and listen first. And then if you have questions, of course, email your officials in government. You can also go talk to your representatives in government. They're super knowledgeable, and if you have a problem, they probably want to help you. They're your representative, know?
There's obviously a local leader, you know him, Dr. Chip Fletcher, who is like the expert in sea level rise locally, and I started going to Surfrider chapter meetings opportunistically when I was working on local policy, and they just bring in experts to talk about their specific thing, and then now I feel empowered with the most recent knowledge, understanding, and data around sea level rise, which is one of our primary stressors here, about what to expect and how we can be more resilient. And that like factored into us choosing this place that ended up being a few feet off the ground. And so like, because it's raised.
All right.
So it's like when you have access to the information, then you can make decisions with that information in mind. And I only feel confident with that information when it's coming from experts that devoted their lives.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, right? We actually did a study once, and it was like, who do you trust the most to give you information? And, the news is actually pretty high, and media and scientists are pretty high, and government was a little bit lower than we were, expected to see. But it really does make sense, right? Thinking about, you grow up going to school, you're learning from people who you're told are experts at that subject, and so you want to get subject matter experts, which here too is also community leaders, key messengers. And so it's getting involved is about talking to those people and coming through a lens of like listening and learning. But then if you have a good idea, share it. Why not? I want to hear from people's cool ideas all the time.
Yes.
I love learning.
I know that we already did the other episode, so I asked you a wrap up that was obviously what your biggest messenger was. And for people listening, you're just gonna have to go listen to that longer one. But for this one, what is your best piece of advice for young people? We have a lot of passionate, amazing young people that listen to this show. What is your piece of advice for them? Who, if they know they want to stay local, they know they're staying in this neighborhood for the rest of their life, for this community, what is your best takeaway to pass on to them?
I think first and foremost, go check out your neighborhood board. Here specifically, people have neighborhood boards, and people are on those boards because they really, really care about their community.
And they know what's going on.
They know what's going on, and they know how the politics are at play. And I think they can not only help you grow and learn, but ultimately it's like a volunteer elected position for a lot of people. So they're only there because they care. Mm-hmm. And it's a really great opportunity to learn and connect and to meet other people who care. And you can learn about nonprofits you want to get involved in. You can learn about people working in government who attend. People in government, we also are part of the community. We attend neighborhood board meetings,
And you can bring your issues to the table, which I think is cool.
It's super easy to bring an issue there. And then sometimes people you can talk about, actually they are working on this, and you can learn I didn't know that they were producing a climate adaptation strategy, for instance. We just started our public comment period for this, which is a chance for the community to give feedback on what it is the government's proposing that we'll do with supportive community and through empowering individual actions, all a part of the plan. And we want to hear feedback from it, and we're talking with so many people about it, and they're like, wow, one, I didn't know we had an Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. We get a lot. And two, I can't believe you're doing this work. It's so important. It's amazing. And they want to do more. Mm-hmm. So it's a really great entry point. Yeah. And I think remembering that everybody who works in any job, they're all a part of the community. Young, old, you're all a part of the community, even your school community, whatever. And so that's the chance to raise your voice and bring an issue that you have to the table and learn from people of different areas to make your community as a whole better, no matter what job or what age you are. It's such a good space to get started, and
people can start right now.
You can start right now. Go online, type in your neighborhood, and say, who's in charge of a neighborhood board, or when's the next meeting, and go. You can also check out your city council and go to the next city council meeting and
vote down ballot
and vote. Exactly. There's so many ways to get civically engaged, and I mean, heck, you can email me. I'll answer. Right? I love to get fun emails and talk to community.
For the people listening who live on Oahu too, I'm going to link that the plan that is accepting public comment for a little bit longer, right? Because we want to all have a say in what climate adaptation looks like for our home, and this is a great opportunity to actually provide that feedback directly.
Exactly, and it's following on 2 years of community engagement to develop the plan as well, and so community has been with us working on it from the start, and now we're in that phase of, did we hear you correctly?
Yeah, and what do you have to say about this?
We want to know, and then following that, of course, it'll be implementation phase. How can we keep working with community to implement all these actions? And we have really great ideas. We're really excited about it. I'm thankful that I got to be a part of creating the plan, and even more excited to implement it.
That's to make it real now.
You dream of. So
well, thank you for connecting all the dots from COP to local activism to your own nonprofit. I think that people are leaving with so much tools in their toolkit, or at least pathways to build those tools. So
thank you so much. I always say, I work in climate adaptation by day, but by early morning and night, I do climate advocacy with Care About Climate in hopes of empowering other young people to find their passion and their role in this space too. And I just love that you wanted to talk so much about it. So thank you for sharing about my journey, but also being a part of it. This is a community too. So
you're the best, Hailey. Thanks for coming on Sustainability in the Sea.